Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about arrhythmias. So, we know arrhythmias is that if we talk about arrhythmias, it means actually the pacemaker. So, arrhythmias can is just you know when you don't have the normal ECG, and when normal ECG components are not shown in the ECG diagram, we call it an arrhythmia. So it can be sometimes a normal condition, or sometimes it can be the some sort of like uh, not normal. It can be some sort of pathological. So let's just talk about there are two types of arrhythmias: pacemaker abnormalities and conduction abnormalities. So pacemaker abnormalities, that means the problems that arise with the sinus node. So it can be either arising within the sinus node or arising outside the node. So the conduction abnormalities is the some other problems with other components of this conduction system in the heart. So pacemaker means problems associated with SA node. So the ones that are arising in the sinus node are sinus tachycardia, sinus bradycardia, and respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And outside the SA node, we find this atrial and ventricular ectopic beats, tachycardia, fibrillation, and flutter. So the conduction abnormalities are sinoatrial block, atrioventricular block, bundle branch block, and WW syndrome. And then these tachycardia, fibrillation, flutter, atrio and ventricular have these causes. The reasons long QT syndrome and paroxysmal tachycardia can be reasons for atrial and ventricular tachycardia, fibrillation, and flutter. Okay, so these things goes together. Normally, heart can beat at 100 beats per minute if denervated. This means denervated means this heart within the SA node alone can maintain a heartbeat of 100 beats per minute. Otherwise, it can be 60 to 100 beats per minute in the range because of this. The because of the effect caused by this effect caused by the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. It has a range to 60 to 100 beats per minute. But if it's given to beat alone, it will beat at 100 beats per minute rate. If it's denervated, that means if the nerve supply from sympathetic and parasympathetic are not given along, this they not can beat at 100 beats per minute rate, and this is called intrinsic heart rate. Nervated heartbeat is 70 beats per minute due to predomination of parasympathetic tone, vagus nerve. So even though the range is given as 60 to 100, this average heartbeat of a normal healthy person is given to be 70 beats per minute. The reason is that parasympathetic tone predominates at the resting state due to predomination of parasympathetic tone or the vagus nerve. So we call the nerve for parasympathetic system as the vagus nerve. So it predominates at rest, because we know when we are at rest, we our heart has heart beats normal. So in a parasympathetic way, in a calm way. So if you do exercises, it might rise more than that. So let's skip to pacemaker abnormalities now. So arise in the sinus node, sinus tachycardia. First one, arising within the sinus node, we call sinus tachycardia, sinus bradycardia, and respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So the first one is sinus tachycardia, means it is when the heart beats above 100 beats per minute. So you can say that this rapid heart rate. So the reasons that can be affecting sinus tachycardia is the psychological stress such as anxiety or panic. So when we are at a panic stage or in an anxiety state, or like in front of a stage, or if you are really in a panic state, like if you see a ghost, you get sinus tachycardia. So the physical stress that can also be a reason, like anemia, lack of red blood cells, hypoxia. So what is hypoxia, and even exercise, during exercise also you get um, sinus tachycardia, fever, intoxication, and shock. So these physical stresses cause sinus tachycardia, and any condition that increases sympathetic tone causes sinus tachycardia. So it's actually a normal condition When your sympathetic tone increases, it is not really pathological. It's a normal condition, and the heart rate observed it is about 100 above. If it's about 100 beats per minute, we call it a sinus tachycardia. So the drugs that we can use to reduce this condition, like in anemia or hypoxia or anxiety panic, is this atenolol. So atenolol, what does this do is it's an adrenergic beta blocker. So we know that adrenergic means adrenergic beta blockers are found at places where the sympathetic nervous supplies happens. So for example, let's Google it out, like um, adrenergic beta blockers receptors purpose, right? What is So, beta-adrenergic receptors mediate critical sympathetic response in the cardiovascular, pulmonary, metabolic, and central nervous system. So, it's a sympathetic responses. It just mediates sympathetic responses. So, the nerves are always sympathetic, and is the cardiovascular, pulmonary, metabolic, and central nervous system. So cardiovascular in our heart, and pulmonary means in our lungs, and metabolic and central nervous systems. So what happens when beta adrenergic receptors are activated? The activated beta adrenergic receptors is phosphorylated, resulting in binding of beta arrestin that physically intervene further G-protein coupled leading to receptor desynchronization. So we know we say, let's say, transmitter. What's the neurotransmitter used it? Yeah, I think it's the one in sympathetic nervous system. So it's actually norepinephrine. Are present on the surface of almost every type of mammalian cell. These receptors are stimulated physiologically by the neurotransmitter norepinephrine and the adrenergic medullary hormone epinephrine. Fine, so let's get back to our lesson. So these adrenergic beta blockers are sympathetic receptors that are found in this cardiovascular system and central nervous system, pulmonary system, and almost every mammalian cell. So it just atenolol is a drug that used to block these receptors. And then this, so thereby it reduces the heart rate because the sympathetic nerve supply is inhibited. Okay, so that is the reason for using adrenergic beta blockers for sinus tachycardia. So if we talk about sinus bradycardia, it has a heart rate of below 60 beats per minute. Okay, so below 60 beats per minute, normal phenomenon in trained athletes and elderly. So it's a normal phenomenon in trained athletes and elderly. Hypothermia, SA naught metabolism, and hypothyroidism, and jaundice, and intracranial pressure. So the reasons that this is sinus bradycardia is when the heartbeat is below 60, so it's like very low heartbeat. You can see that here in the sinus tachycardia you find these gaps between QRS, QRST, one one P wave to the other P wave. There's a huge gap, right? And a little gap, but here you can see from one P wave to the other P wave there's a lot of gap. So this is a normal condition. So normal phenomenon in trained athletes and elderly. So this sinus bradycardia or the low heartbeat can be found in elderly persons and athletes, and it's a normal condition for them, right? For us, it's not. So hypothermia means energy temperature dropping. So when temperature drop, this SA naught metabolism also drops, causing this sinus bradycardia. So hypothyroidism also, that means when their blood levels has the lower thyroid level, it also drops. It also acts as a cause for dropping of this SNR metabolism. So the reasons that can be is this jaundice. In jaundice, no, these three reasons affect hypothermia, temperature drop, hypothyroidism, that means low thyroid level, and jaundice. In jaundice, bile salts are there. So the bile salts act as a cause for that this SA non metabolism dropping, mainly because when we have bile salts, excess of bile salts, um, we know that So anyway, these bile salts, excess of bile salts affect in SA0 activity and reduce its metabolism. So jaundice means excess of bile salts presenting in our body. So intracranial pressure increasing also affect for this condition. So cranial pressure increases. So intracranial pressure, that's another reason. Patients digoxin or beta blockers. So patients on digoxin and beta blocker. So digoxin is a drug we use to block these beta adrenergic blockers, and when patients having some other disease use this digoxin to block their beta blockers, it can be affecting as a reason for sinus bradycardia. I mean, it overdrops the heart rate, causing sinus bradycardia. So sinus node disease also, that means that is because of a disease that get into a node, it gets weakness, so its metabolic rate metabolism goes down. And six sinus syndrome. So six sinus syndrome, let's just google this out and actually check out so we get a new more idea what is six sinus syndrome. Sixth sinus syndrome. Sixth sinus syndrome is a type of heart rhythm disorder. It affects the heart's natural pacemaker, which controls the heartbeat. Sixth sinus syndrome causes slow heartbeats, pauses, long period between heartbeats, or irregular heartbeats. Sixth sinus syndrome is relatively uncommon. So what it comes is a gradual loss of SA node function that comes with age. You may have no symptoms or may have experienced dizziness, fainting, shortness of breath, or fatigue. Sixth sinus syndrome may be treated by changing medications. Okay, and also I want to check out this digoxin. It's a beta blocker. So digoxin is used to treat heart failure, usually along with other medications used to treat digoxin medical is a regular heartbeat. So sin used for which arrhythmia type? For arrhythmia type. Arrhythmias detection has a limited but useful role either alone or in combination with other agents such as beta blockers, data delays or arrhythmias. So initially factory resting ventricular rate control in patients with chronic atrial fibrillation. So it's actually given for chronic atrial fibrillation. So let's go and check what is fibrillation. So the third one is respiratory sinus arrhythmia. It's a normal phenomenon. So this respiratory sinus arrhythmia is found within us also. That is when we inspire, our heart rate is increased. So when in our expiration state, we have a comparatively reduced heart rate. So you can see our heart rate drops in expiration and it increases in high inspiration. So sinus arrhythmias recorded by a respiratory sinus arrhythmias recorded by a cardio tachymeter. So is spillover of signals from medullary respiratory center into adjacent vasomotor center during expiratory cycle. So this occurs due to a spillover of signals from medullary respiratory center into adjacent vasomotor center during inspiratory respiratory cycle, require cardio tachymeter readings. Also, so we discussed what is sinus tachycardia, sinus bradycardia, respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And so if we talk about outside the node, ectopic beats, premature contractions, origination of pacemaker cells outside the SA node. So atrial ectopics, ventricular ectopics, ectopic beats, premature contractions, origination of pacemaker cells outside the SA node, atrial ectopics, ventricular ectopics, possible ectopics for CR, local areas of ischemia, small. So if we talk about the possible, okay, so let's